of my administration, we have managed to add a further 4.5 million title deeds that have been issued under my administration. And this was done to keep the promise of our founding fathers alive. These are among many other programs and projects aimed at realizing the dream of our forefathers. Fellow Kenyans, as I have already mentioned, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta taught us that we must not focus on what has been done. Our focus should be on what remains to be done. But in giving you the 3 examples of my achievements, I was not telling you what we have done. I was telling you why we did it. We did it in order to finish the business of our founding fathers, so that we can indeed reimagine the Kenyan dream. I now want to shift to 2 things that I believe remain to be done in order to reimagine our new Kenya. The first thing goes back to T.J. Mboya and the thoughts he expounds on in his book Freedom and After, and his collection of speeches that were published under the title The Challenge of Nationhood. 50 years ago, Mboya warned Kenyans against constitutional rigidity. As I have already mentioned, he told us that a constitution is not an end in itself. It is a means to a greater end. It is a living document. And if certain elements of the Constitution outlive their historical purposes, they become a cancer. They must be removed, or they will infect the good elements of the mother law. And that is why, fellow Kenyans, we removed Section 2A that had been added to the Independence Constitution in the early 1980s. We removed this section in 1991 in order to create a multi-party system. Why? Because this Section 2A had outlived its historical purposes, and it was morphing into a political cancer. Then after the 2008 violence, we embedded the National Accord and Reconciliation Act into our Constitution to expand the executive arm of government. This happened out of historical necessity. And then again in 2010, we formulated and adopted a new constitutional order, altogether replacing the Independence Constitution. Indeed, today, I am truly thankful to the Almighty God for having been given the mandate by the people of Kenya to not only lead its implementation, but also to serve as the first president under this new constitution. 10 years later, I am already discerning a constitutional moment. And I want to be clear, not a moment to replace the 2010 Constitution, but one to improve on it. A moment that will right what we didn't get correct in 2010. But fundamentally, the constitutional moment that I discern is one that will bring an end to the senseless cycles of violence that we have experienced in every election cycle since 1992. And one that will deepen our democratic credentials as a country and lead to a much more inclusive society, which I do believe was the intention of the framers of the 2010 Constitution. Fellow Kenyans, we cannot reimagine our nationhood also without changing our political architecture. But we cannot change this architecture without re-engineering our Constitution. If we have done great things in the area of brick and mortar, the greater things that remain to be done have to do with our governance system and we must not be afraid of changing the system if it does not serve our present and future purposes. The second thing that remains to be done is the transformation of our civic culture. Culture is at the core of reimagining a national dream. And when the drafters of Chapter 6 of our Constitution put pen to paper, what they wanted was to bring this culture to order. But it is difficult to police a political culture. More so, if the culture is like one that was described by Canon Donaldson of Westminster Abbey. Canon Donaldson, on March 20th, 1925, spoke of a culture that thrives in politics without principle, wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without morality, science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice. And part of this sermon speaks to our reality today as Kenyans. If we are to push the reset button and reimagine our dreams as a nation, we must transform our civic culture to one that is based and biased towards duty, hard work, and integrity. Fellow countrymen, we need political leaders totally committed to promoting not themselves, but what will transform lives of our people in line with what our founding fathers yearned for. Indeed, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, and I quote, "We need political leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice. Not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity." End of quote. Finally, fellow Kenyans, I want to address in brief our national response to the coronavirus pandemic, because I will be addressing you again on this issue in a few days to come. As a caring, responsive government, and to cushion all Kenyan households against the economic shocks triggered by the coronavirus disease, we continue to progressively roll out targeted measures to sustain livelihoods. We have reduced taxes to enhance affordability of all products by reducing VAT from 16% to 14%, and increase the earnings and purchase power of all employees by reducing pay as you earn. But we have also incentivized business to retain staff and operations by reducing corporation tax. Last Saturday, I also announced an 8-point economic stimulus program that will see additionally us sending a further Kenya shillings 53.7 billion to Kenyan households. Indeed, I have noted with concern the fact that our hospitality sector, that has been greatly hit as a result of the lockdowns, we have many of our workers now who are seemingly being laid off as a result of there being no business in all our tourism or hospitality facilities. And in order to cushion these workers and to work in line with this sector, my administration will focus on an intervention by offering an initial 2 billion shillings from the Exchequer to support hotels and all related establishments and to ensure that they are able to maintain their staff complement. And our Cabinet Subcommittee will be meeting to engage with stakeholders to develop the protocols for this. Fellow Kenyans, we need not be persuaded as a people why we must do everything in our power to conquer this invisible disease, this invisible enemy. But to do so and regain the ground we have lost, we need to come together as a nation. each foodstuffs, clothes, sanitary items, and other support items to the fund, which have been channeled to needy and vulnerable Kenyans affected by this crisis. I thank, too, all our international development partners who have quickly responded to our needs during this difficult time. Indeed, to recognize and honor these Kenyans who have exhibited exemplary service, sacrifice, patriotism, and heroism, and a high sense of civic duty in helping steer Kenyans through the current pandemic, and on behalf of an internally grateful nation, I have, on this first day of June 2020, issued an executive order establishing a new national award and state commendation, the Presidential Order of Service, Uzalendo Award. The names of the inaugural recipients of this high national honor have been published in a special issue of the Kenya Gazette dedicated to them. Fellow Kenyans, I would like to end my address today by once again re-emphasizing the calling by our founding fathers, that they went through the fire and yet founded a nation that we call Kenya today. Their voices are calling out to each and every one of us during this moment of uncertainty. And they are telling us to be our very best in our darkest moments, just as they were. They are telling us that they fought for the liberation war for over 40 years and it came to pass. We will fight the challenges that we are faced with today, and this too shall come to pass. Mimi sitaki niongeze zaidi, isipokuwa tena kuchukua nafasi hii kuwatakia Wakenya wenzangu pahali popote mlipo, ikiwa ni Madaraka Day ya kipekee, kwa sababu